Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're opening up the sources on something I think many of us feel this core paradox around leadership and, well, preparation. Imagine this. A concert violinist, incredibly skilled. She practices, 20 years, knows every detail, every tough passage. But when she walks on stage,
Mm,
for that final performance, she knows that the magic, the thing that really grabs the audience, it's not just her skill. There's something else, something maybe unearned, involved. It's that weird mix, isn't it? Relentless practice, but also this kind of surrendered dependence. That's the tension we're diving into. The paradox is this. You absolutely need preparation to get into position, yet the big breakthroughs, the promotions, they don't seem to respond just to effort alone.
that's exactly it. Our sources really dig into this. They explore how divine favor, let's call it, consistently seems to find people who prepared faithfully. But they're super clear. Favor isn't earned by the prep work. It's more like chassis. It's received by those who are actually ready to handle it, to steward it. And this tension, sources call it the sacred tension, it's incredibly relevant for any ambitious leader today, especially in a world, that often rewards just speed and visibility over that deep, quiet work of character building. So we're going to try and give you a kind of theological and practical roadmap for managing that balance.
Okay, great. So our mission for this deep dive is to really unpack that rhythm, right? Between the hard work, the discipline, preparation, and that humble dependence. We want to make sure we gain the knowledge quickly, but also thoroughly so you can walk that narrow ridge with some confidence. Let's kick off with the main biblical case study that comes up again and again in the material, Joseph. You know the story: dreamer, manager, prisoner, then suddenly prime minister. So, what does his story teach us about this relationship between hard work, the preparation, and that sudden, unexpected promotion, the favor?
Joseph's journey is, well, it's kind of the perfect template, mainly because his preparation was almost entirely hidden, invisible, you could say, before he ever stood in front of Pharaoh, interpreting those dreams. Think about it. He was managing someone else's house, Potiphar's, and later he was basically running someone else's prison. These weren't small tasks. He was essentially the COO of two pretty complex operations, high-level, trusted middle management.
Yeah, and the sources really emphasize this. His skill, his administrative competence, his diligence, none of that forced Pharaoh to call him up, but that hidden work, it prepared him. It built the capacity, the vessel, so that when favor did call his name, he could actually handle the responsibility of, well, the entire nation of Egypt. The formula seems pretty inescapable when you look at it like that. Effort positions you, favor promotes you, competence might get you in the door, into the room where decisions happen. But favor, that seems to decide who actually gets a seat at the big table, the national leadership table in his case. So the preparation wasn't about earning the breakthrough.
It was about building the capacity to host it, to manage it, when it finally showed up.
Wow, yeah. That really reframes how you think about those maybe quieter years in your career, doesn't it? It shifts the focus. It's less about preparing for my specific next job and more about preparing to be excellent wherever I happen to be right now. But that formula, it inherently creates this central tension for anyone who's driven, right? Anyone professional. How do you really go after excellence, give your absolute best effort without tipping over into self-reliance, without starting to believe that your best is enough, that you're somehow owed the success?
That is the question. Get that balance wrong, and you're heading for either stagnation or burnout. And this paradox, it matters, I think, now more than ever. Because when you mix ambition with these instant feedback loops we have, in the modern workplace, leaders become really, really prone to falling into one of two extremes. Our sources have this great image for them, the twin bitches. Okay, so the first ditch is passivity, or maybe false dependence. This is where people kind of hide behind the spiritual sounding language. They say, oh, I'm just waiting on the right time, or I'm waiting on God's direction. But really, it's often inertia or fear, or maybe even sloth, just disguised as faith. This posture uses the language of dependence, but it's really masking a lack of courage, or maybe just a failure to plan. Think about that servant in the parable, the one with a single talent. He wasn't condemned for losing the money. He was condemned because he buried it. His fear has sort of dressed itself up as prudence or piety.
Right. So that false dependence is really just a fear of failure that stops you from taking any action at all. Okay. What about the other side? The person who's maybe too active, always pushing, always charging forward.
That's the second ditch, presumption, or you could call it self-sufficiency. This is charging ahead purely on self-will, mistaking pride for confidence. It's like you're over-preparing on your own steam, but under-depending on anything beyond yourself.
Yeah.
And this, well, it almost always leads somewhere bad. burnout maybe,
Hmm.
ethical compromises, or just the sheer vanity of believing you are the sole author of your success.
Yeah.
Yeah, the sources point to Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel 4. That's the archetype, isn't it?
Yeah.
The leader looking out over the city he built, saying, look what I did. The danger there is that achievement without humility, it hollows you out. It hollows out the soul. And similarly, they mention Abraham's plan with Hagar. That's seen as an example of trying to force God's timeline, trying to achieve through impatient strategy what only divine favor could actually bring about. So yeah, that's the ditch of pride, of trying to accelerate things, maybe cutting corners along the way.
Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting. We have to avoid both pitfalls, right? The swampy marsh of paralyzing passivity on one side, and then the steep, slippery slope of self-sufficient presumption on the other. How on earth do we stay on that narrow ridge between them?
Right. And I think the key is realizing you need a diagnostic tool first, because what you need to do next depends entirely on where you are right now. And sources introduce something really helpful here. The preparation favor grid. It's designed precisely for this. Just picture a simple chart. On the bottom, the x-axis, you've got preparation, that's your effort, your diligence, your skill building. And then on the side of the y-axis, you have favor. Think of that as unmerited opportunity, divine timing, things beyond your direct control. This grid helps you locate yourself, figure out, okay, where am I on this map right now? And maybe more importantly, it gives you some strategic advice on what action to take next. Should we break down the 4 quadrants?
Yeah, let's do it. Start at the bottom left, I guess.
Okay. Quadrant I, low prep, low favor. This is what the sources call the stuck place. You feel discouraged, maybe frustrated. Nothing seems to be moving. The diagnosis here is pretty clear. Effort is needed. You need to break the inertia. And the recommended action. Start with what they call a minimum viable obedience, or MVO.
MVO, minimum viable obedience. Okay, I like the sound of that. But hang on, how is that different from just, deciding to start small? Is MVO a strategy, or is it more like a moral thing?
That's a great question. It's actually both. It's strategic because it tackles inertia. We all know the hardest part of anything big is just getting started, right? But it's also a moral imperative, because the MBO stops you from using that high-sounding language of dependence as an excuse for just being complacent. If you can't even manage a minimum viable obedience, a tiny faithful step, then you're probably firmly stuck in that first ditch, the ditch of passivity.
Got it. Okay, so that's the starting point if you're stuck. What's next on the grid?
All right, let's move over to the quadrant that honestly probably causes the most emotional distress for driven people. Quadrant 2, high prep, low favor. We could call this the faithful long hauler. This is Joseph in prison, basically. You've done the work. You're excellent at what you do. Your systems are maybe even brilliant. But the breakthrough, it just hasn't arrived. The diagnosis here is simple but hard. Endurance is needed. But the danger in this quadrant is really twofold. First, there's despair, obviously, just giving up. Second, there's the risk of slipping into what our sources call transactional theology.
Transactional theology. Can you unpack that a bit? What does that look like in, say, a career context?
Yeah, it's basically the belief that your effort earns the outcome. It's the kind of thinking like, look, if I put in my 10,000 hours, then God or the universe or the company owes me the promotion. And then, of course, when that promotion doesn't materialize on your schedule, you feel betrayed or resentful, or you just burn out completely. So the action required in this quadrant, it's tough. It's about maintaining your disciplines, like Noah, building that ark for decades, right? Keep building with excellence. But while you do that, you have to actively practice humble dependence. You have to keep acknowledging, maybe daily, that true advancement doesn't respond to effort alone. Your discipline has to be aimed at character formation, not at calculating what you think you're owed.
That's a hard place to live, maintaining excellence without expectation. Okay, what about the top half of the grid?
Okay, next up is a quadrant that seems great on the surface, but it's actually quite dangerous. Quadrant 3, low prep, high favor. This is the perilous lift. So favor arrives unexpectedly. Maybe it's a sudden huge promotion, a massive contract lands in your lap. Maybe you literally win the lottery. But the problem is you lack the underlying character or the systems or just the basic capacity to manage this sudden influx of opportunity or resource. The diagnosis, there's a major capacity gap. And the danger, total collapse, favor without a prepared vessel to receive it. Well, it often leads to waste or even destruction. And it doesn't just hurt a leader, it can damage the whole organization or family.
Yeah, we've all seen versions of that, haven't we? The professional equivalent of the lottery winner who blows it all in a year. The opportunity just completely swamps their ability to manage it.
Precisely. So the sources are really clear here. If you find yourself in this quadrant, the action needed is immediate rapid formation. They suggest implementing something like a 90-day on-ramp. This means intensive mentoring, maybe bringing in outside help, setting up staged responsibility. Basically, you have to build the vessel fast. And this is exactly what happened with Joseph, right? He went from prisoner to prime minister almost overnight. But critically, his prior competence, learned in Potiphar's house and the prison, made that incredibly rapid elevation survivable for him. He had some foundations.
Right, the foundations were there, even if hidden. Okay, so that leaves one quadrant, the goal, I assume.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Quadrant fourth, high prep, high favor. This is the steward. This is the sweet spot where it all comes together. Prepared people encounter these unmerited opportunities, and they steward them well. The diagnosis here is simple: success realized. But the work isn't over. Now the challenge shifts to sustainability. So the action needed in Quadrant fourth is about designing systems for the long haul. Things like long-term endurance planning, robust succession planning, and intentionally increasing generosity. These kinds of systems become crucial institutional safeguards. Why? To guard against the almost inevitable sense of entitlement that can creep in with sustained success.
That framework, wow. That's incredibly helpful because it moves the conversation away from just, why isn't this happening for me? And it shifts it towards a really strategic question. Okay,
Right.
based on this grid, where am I actually and what specific action do I need to take next?
It turns that frustrating paradox into more of a strategic challenge you can actually engage with. Absolutely. It gives you handles. And to support that strategy, the sources also offer some really concrete rhythms, daily or weekly practices that help you explicitly integrate the preparation side and the dependence side. They really emphasize the synergy that this biblical idea of cooperation is necessary. It's how things are designed to work in daily life. One of the most powerful tools mentioned is the plan, pray, proceed pivot loop. It sounds simple, but it's quite profound. You draft realistic, excellent plans, that's the prepare part. Then you actively seek wisdom and consciously surrender the outcomes, that's pray. Then you execute those plans with the diligence and excellence, that's proceed. And then this is the crucial bit. You monitor the actual outcomes, you pay attention to reality, and you stay completely open to God maybe reordering your plans. That's a pivot. It basically formalizes adaptability within a structure of faithfulness.
I like that. That loop directly addresses the anxiety of the high prep person, doesn't it? Because often people who are great planners hate pivoting. It feels like failure, like their plan wasn't good enough. But here, the pivot isn't failure. It's an expected, integrated part of the process, driven either by results or by, divine guidance.
Precisely. It builds resilience into the system. Another key practical tool they mentioned, specifically designed to inject humility into those big high-prep projects, is something called pre-mortem prayer. So before you launch a major initiative, you deliberately take time to pray a pre-mortem. You actually ask for revelation about potential blind spots, hidden vulnerabilities, maybe ethical traps you haven't seen yet, before you execute the plan. It forces your meticulous planning to meet with profound humility. It makes you look beyond your own limited spreadsheet or vision board.
Pre-mortem prayer. That's interesting. Okay, let me push back slightly on one of the other tools you mentioned earlier, Sabbath as strategic dependence. I mean, in modern leadership circles, we talk a lot about self-care, managing burnout, taking vacations. How is this Sabbath concept intrinsically different from just being a smart manager who blocks off time off?
Yeah, that's a really important distinction because on the surface, they can look very similar. Rest is rest, right? But the difference lies in the intention, the theology behind it. Self-care often is quite transactional. I rest so that I can be more productive later. It's still ultimately about maximizing output. Strategic dependence, or Sabbath as the sources frame it, is fundamentally theological. It's an enforced stopping, a cessation of striving that actively trains you to trust. Trust that God actually sustains the work, sustains the world, even when you stop working. It directly counters that striver's deep-seated belief that everything will collapse without their constant effort. So its rest is an active posture of faith, not just a strategy for physical or mental recovery. And ultimately, all these tools, all these practices, they really just connect back to that ancient, simple pattern we see in Proverbs, like Proverbs 21.31. The horse is made ready for the day of battle, but the victory belongs to the Lord. Our job, prepare the horse. Faithfully, meticulously, excellently, that's the preparation part. But the outcome, the victory, we must depend entirely on divine favor for that. That's the dependence part. Both are essential.
Right. So bringing it all home, what does this mean for you, the listener, in your daily decisions, your leadership, maybe just your work this week?
I think it means learning to let your preparation, your discipline, your hard work, Let it be an act of trust, not some kind of calculation of what you're owed.
Mhm.
It means figuring out how to give your absolute best, pour yourself into the preparation without obsessing over it or demanding a specific outcome.
Yeah, to pull it all together, the core finding, I think, from all these sources is that true wisdom, true effectiveness, it lives right in that dynamic equilibrium, that sweet spot, where your diligence meets trust, where your most sophisticated planning learns to coexist with total surrender. And the paradox itself, it's not just some clever riddle we're supposed to solve and move on from. It's actually a formative training ground. It's designed to shape our character to build humility, patience, and real courage over the long haul. That really reframes the entire purpose of our professional lives, doesn't it? The goal isn't just hitting the target, achieving success. It's actually about the character being formed through the process of trying. So we'll leave you with this final thought to chew on, something to maybe explore in your own planning this week, building on what we've discussed. Are you currently preparing only for what you think you can control? For that next incremental step you feel you can earn through effort alone? Or are you preparing with excellence for what only divine favor can reveal, for possibilities beyond your own earning potential? The answer to that could redefine not just your path to success, but maybe even your whole sense of purpose in the process.